Okay, good morning, everybody. It's great to be back in Bloomington, Indiana. I left in 1988, and this is my first time returning to this beautiful city and this beautiful campus. I graduated in journalism and political science, and I never thought that I would actually one day address an audience in the Kelley School of Business. I never knew business. I had many friends doing business studies when we were studying here, but I always had a passion for journalism. So I've got a short video that I would like to play, which kind of encapsulates and gives you an idea of where Indonesia is today, and more importantly, where it might be heading in the future. So could we play the video, please? This year at the Indonesia Economic Forum, we are talking about imagining the future. If you can imagine it, you can achieve it. Whether we will have streets full of traffic or whether we will have a much higher standard of living, it will depend on how we grow our industries and how we focus on the new growth sectors such as education, such as healthcare, such as new technologies. Indonesia must be a player in this fast developing disruption that is going on.
After 3 years of hard work on economic reforms, we're finally seeing the results of those reforms. I think we're hitting record highs in survey after survey after survey, right? From World Bank Ease of Doing Business survey to United Nations UNCTAD survey of multinational executives around the world. So I think 3 years of hard work on economic reform, on changing the mindset in the bureaucracy, on the nuts and bolts of the economy. I think we're seeing those efforts starting to pay off. So if you ask me what would be our vision for Indonesia 2045, I would say number one thing is a just society, right? So I personally would not necessarily even aim for the highest economic growth rate or the biggest GDP in the world. Above all things, I would want our country 100 years after independence to be a just society.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a video we produced for my Indonesia Economic Forum, which we host every year in November. This was from November last year, where we were talking about Indonesia 2045. Now, 2045 will be a very important year for Indonesia because it will be the 100 years of independence from Dutch rule, which Indonesia achieved in 1945. So, my presentation today really is about an emerging economic powerhouse and how can Indonesia get here? Now there is a lot of opportunity, there is a lot of optimism, there is a lot of energy where Indonesia is concerned today. It is a multicultural, multi-ethnic, a very diverse country. From west to east, Indonesia stretches 3 time zones. It stretches 3,000 miles. I think if you consider Indonesia, when Indonesians talk about themselves and returning home, they always say, we come home to Tanah Air, which means land and water. So Indonesia is an archipelagic nation. I think that's very critical to understand because it's made up of 17,000 islands stretching 3,000 miles. So managing a country of this nature is very difficult, very challenging. But I think where the country has come from over the last 20 years has been quite an amazing story. I am Singaporean. I arrived in Jakarta in February of 1998, and if those of you in this room understand Indonesia's history, 1998 was a very tumultuous year for Indonesia. That was the start of the Asian economic crisis. The Indonesian rupiah was plummeting, falling like a rock. There was political chaos and turmoil. Banks were going bankrupt, companies were being upended, and I arrived in Jakarta at that time, and I loved it because I was a journalist at that time. I was writing for the Singapore Business Times, and I was the Indonesia correspondent. The reason I say that is in 1998, Indonesia was on its knees, and a lot of people at that time had given up hope on this country. There was talk of the balkanization of Indonesia because it's made up of so many ethnic groups and islands, and people thought that this was it. Indonesia would break up, right? But 10, 20 years down the road, today, Indonesia is one of the fastest emerging economies in the world. It has a vibrant democracy. We are going to have our 4th direct presidential elections in April 2019. We have, I think, some of the ingredients and factors to really take the next step forward, the next step up in terms of economic growth. So just a quick snapshot of where we are today. I think the key point here is Indonesia has a young population. 60% of Indonesians are under 30 years of age, which means there's a 30-year runway for Indonesians to upgrade themselves and to rise from where it is today, which is basically in between a lower middle income to a middle income economy to an upper middle economy. And how does it get there is really critical. So we joke in Indonesia because Indonesians are famously social, right? You see 4 of them together, they won't be talking, but they'll be texting each other around a table. They love their smartphones, right? I mean, if you take a smartphone away from an Indonesian, you'll have a riot on your hands. So 100 million smartphones in the country today. And this is going to rise to 150 million. Why are smartphones important? Because smartphones are a tool of business. not just communications. More and more Indonesians are doing business online. They're connecting online. And as you can see, 30% of all transactions today are done by online shoppers. And it's all smartphones. It's not laptops, it's not computers, it's smartphones. So if you have a smartphone to sell, you can come to Indonesia. Apple is already very good there, but I think Samsung is probably the number one selling brand. So I basically say that disruption is an opportunity for Indonesia. It's a $200 billion business opportunity if you can understand how to maximize and leverage on this disruption that is going on within Indonesian economy. I'm going to focus, Indonesia is a large economy. Yeah, it's spread across many, many sectors, from mining to fisheries, agriculture, retail. But I'm going to focus on what I call the emerging sectors. Yeah, Indonesia is rich. We always say that Indonesia is rich in natural resources, which is true. But I want to focus on the future, which I think is going to be driven and really, based on its talent. It's human resources, where today there's a lot of focus on helping Indonesians upgrade themselves in terms of their skills, in terms of their knowledge, in terms of how they're educated. I think more and more Indonesians are going abroad, but the whole education system itself is being transformed, right? There are now a lot of private schools in Indonesia. The government is now looking at leveraging on technology to deliver education and to deliver curriculum to the vast regions of Indonesia, especially in the rural areas. So these are the sectors that I think are going to be transformational in terms of driving growth going forward. E-commerce, online travel, online rides, which is, we have a company called Gojek in Indonesia. If those of you who have heard of, they basically drove Uber out of Indonesia. So you can sense the potential, right? These are the 4 unicorns in Indonesia today. I would say that in the next 5 to 6 years, we will add another 4 or 5 unicorns from the digital sector, which will then really drive the digital economy. Yeah. These are figures that I've obtained from various reports on the growth of these sectors. So, by and large, over the last 20 years, Indonesia has added about 20% to its GDP in terms of growth. Yeah. So it was about a $600 million economy. Today it's a $600 billion economy. Today it's a $1 trillion economy. It's the 16th largest economy in the world at $1.1 trillion. But if we can go up to $2 trillion, which is very possible, it will be among the top 10 economies in the world. The potential is in understanding where that growth is coming from and how companies can leverage on that growth. So what does it take to become a digital nation? How do we create, or invest in the digital infrastructure? So the key will be, of course, digital infrastructure. Right? Today, we don't need landlines, we don't need cables, it's telecommunication. So there are a lot of companies, and I think that's one of the big sectors. I don't think, can you see this clearly? It's not coming out too clearly, the bottom part. But this is really where the main telecommunication sectors are growing, how fast they are growing. Oh, I can't even read it, 49%. Can you read it? No, anyway. So these are the things that I think will be important. Green technologies, which means that more and more Indonesia is moving away from polluting industries, especially in mining and in a lot of natural resources. Technology doesn't mean that Indonesia is going to not produce natural resources. What I'm saying is technology is going to help to reduce the pollution in the production of natural resources. So I think that is critical, and now we already see it. For example, in agriculture, the use of drones, the use of modern technology is reducing what I call polluting ingredients. Mining companies are also now looking at, for example, coal is a major export. Now, of course, everybody knows coal is dirty and polluting, but modern technology in coal mines are going to be critical because Indonesia will need energy. Where is it going to get energy from? Yes, you can go into green energies like wind, solar, hydro, but it cannot produce the amount of energy that Indonesia will need going forward. So it is important that technology is leveraged. Oops. There we go. The other factor that will drive change, as I mentioned earlier, is millennials. Yeah, these guys, I don't understand them. But they are going to be critical to the country's future, right? They think differently, they act differently, their worldview is different. But I think they will transform this country because they think and they demand different deliverables from the government, from private sector. They're the ones who want the government to deliver better and higher quality public goods because they're voters. They are going to drive change in Indonesia because they're going to vote governments that don't deliver. And I think today's politicians in Indonesia understand that because they are connected to the world, right? It's a click away, and they'll understand what's happening in the rest of the world. And they say, why are we not getting it here? Why are we backward? Why are we not progressing as quickly as we should? So these guys are going to change Indonesia. And right now, they form 60% of the population. So, I'm sorry, I'm not in that group. I wish I was, but I understand them. And actually, I appreciate the energy that they are bringing to Indonesia today. Yeah. So they will drive change going forward. We have a presidential elections coming, and I think the elections will probably be focused on economics and business growth because these guys want it. Indonesia is really an economy in transition. Yeah, we are moving away from what I would call the traditional sectors to the new sectors. But it needs investments. Yeah, it can't do it on its own. Indonesian companies themselves will not be able to drive this change. We will need to engage with the world. We will need to stay open to foreign direct investments. And most importantly, we must stay open to new ideas, fresh ideas from the world. In terms of what Indonesia needs is about $15 to $20 billion of new investments. This is from outside the country to be invested in the digital economy. And you can see that happening. Gojek, which is basically the first unicorn in Indonesia, has already attracted more than $1 billion of foreign direct investments, right? I mean, that's just one. So you can imagine if more and more unicorns come up, there is a huge demand from foreign investors to invest in these digital startups. But of course, there's also risk because not every digital startup will be successful. But I think in that, I talked to a lot of venture capitalist firms, and they are very keen to go into co-working spaces, into Fintech. Ibu Nurhaida is, I think, probably going to elaborate on that. But Fintech is going to be a major growth driver. Fintech. So the reason being is that growth is accelerating so quickly, and more people are entering the middle class. The current banking system is not able to meet the needs of this growing demand for transactions, right? Only 39% of Indonesians, of the population of 260 million people, actually have bank accounts, right? So that's 40%. So 60% have no bank accounts. How are they going to transact, right? If you're going to grow, you need people to be transacting and doing business, buying and selling. This is where Fintech is going to play a major role. Because if you think about it today, you can transact on your smartphone. You don't need a bank account, right? You can change money. Telecommunication companies are today banks. Gojek is a bank because it helps to transact. And because companies can use these platforms to sell products, then they become a totally different ball game, yeah? And the rate of growth is 16% annually. So if you compound that, and compared to Indonesia's GDP growth, which is only 5%, this is 3 times. It's growing 3 times faster than the national economy. So in terms of the overall financial sector, the financial sector will become a much more dominant sector in overall GDP growth in Indonesia. Edutech is going to be critical. I mentioned earlier in my presentation that the delivery of curriculum and education on technology, on digital platforms, I think is going to become major growth area. But technology can never replace teachers. I think the human aspect of teaching is going to be very critical. But what's happening is that teachers are being aided by technology, because today they can get access to global curriculums. And I think this is where universities, especially educational centers outside of Indonesia, can start thinking about how they can deliver curriculum in Indonesia, right? And this is a growth area. This is a huge industry. You don't need, I mean, of course you always will need physical structures, brick and mortar, but the digital economy can help institutions like the Indiana University to reach students and a whole new market in Indonesia, and I think in many parts of Asia, because this is going to be important. There we go. So why do I say that? Because it's going to transform classrooms. Yeah. Today, under law, the government must set aside 20% of its budget for education. It's not enough. It's vaguely scratching the surface. Yeah. So this is where you have 50 million students, 4 million teachers, 250,000. This is huge. I mean, it's a huge industry. I consider education an industry, in a sense, because there is so much investment needed in this sector. And plus, it's going to create future skills, right? A growing middle class. Today's Indonesia has about 50 million to 60 million people of what we refer to as a consuming class, which means they have discretionary spending power, which means that they are the ones who are demanding better services, better education system. Now, the key here is that it is very clear that the government is going to struggle to meet the demands of everybody. So which is where the private sector is going to play a major role in delivering education in Indonesia going forward. Today, there are already a growing number of private schools, private universities. I am working with 2 companies, actually, one Canadian and one Indian, who are investing in Indonesia in delivering curriculum through this network, and I'm helping them to connect with schools and with educational facilities. But this is going to be an important area of growth, going forward, especially if you find a way to deliver curriculum online and work with teachers to do that. Agri-tech is also going to be really important. A growing population means hungry mouths, right? You're going to feed them. Indonesia still needs to import rice, because it cannot meet its demand domestically. A growing middle class means more money, which means more people are going to consume meat, right? Because right now, meat consumption is still, I'm not sure what the numbers are, but way below global average. This is going to be important, right? I think we are starting to import more meat, especially from Australia. I think the United States is too far in terms of geography, but this is going to be important. So, but as I mentioned earlier, the use of technology in the agricultural sector is going to be critical. And if companies can find technological solutions to rice farming, to helping farmers, for example, improve their yield, that would be a major breakthrough for Indonesia, and it will help farmers improve their standards of living and produce better crops. This is a company that's actually starting to do that. This is an Indonesian company called Sea Agriculture, right? It started to use drones and high-tech sensors to help farmers. So they know exactly when to plant, when to harvest, what are the conditions of the crops going forward, and they make smarter decisions, which is important, right? They help the farmers make the right decisions at the right time. So I think agriculture, technology in agriculture is going to be critical. So this is where we are today, the top 5 predicted fastest growing economies for the coming decade. India, Uganda, Egypt, Tanzania, Indonesia at 6%. Where there is growth, there is going to be opportunity, right? Because growth will drive greater investments, greater innovation, greater generation of ideas, yeah? But let's be real, yeah? We know there are challenges. Yeah, the idea, the prognosis is good, the trajectory is good, but you need to tackle these issues, yeah? This is taken from the World Bank survey of companies doing business in Indonesia in terms of what they think are the most problematic factors for doing business. And you can see at the very top, corruption, inefficient government bureaucracy, access to financing, infrastructure. I don't think you need to be a scientist or a business major to understand this, right? This is critical for Indonesia. And then I think this is where I talked a little earlier about the millennials. They're going to drive this change too, because today corruption is less, accepted. Yeah, more and more people are learning that it actually hurts the government, hurts the country, and hurts the people. I think the government has done a good job in terms of trying to streamline its tax structure, get more companies and more individuals to pay taxes and basically come into the formal economy, which means it will reduce corruption, right, going forward. At the very top levels of government, under the current President Jokowi, corruption is really not tolerated. I think I can't even remember the number of people, high-level government officials who have gone to jail. So it's stricter, I would say, than before. But it's not enough. I think there needs to be a lot more done to try and eliminate corruption in Indonesia. Bureaucratic red tape is another big problem. I think for private businesses especially, this is a critical issue, because if you're spending too much time running around trying to get your licensing and trying to get your proper paperwork in place, you're not doing business. And you're losing an opportunity. Opportunity costs are very high. So I think this is another area that really needs to be addressed. There is movement on it. There is a new policy called one-stop system, where companies need to only go to one place, right, to get all their paperwork sorted out. But it needs a bit more refining. So the other issue is, the Indonesia Economic Forum, we are looking at Indonesia in a broader sense. We mentioned earlier in the video about new growth hubs. If Indonesia wants to be a top 5 economy, it cannot just depend on Java and Jakarta for growth. It needs to create multiple growth hubs. It needs to be able to generate economic activity in its other big islands. And I think what's going to drive a lot of that is also urbanization, because a lot of people are starting to move to the cities, right? Today, the percentage of people between living in rural areas and urban areas is about 50-50. But in another 10-15 years, it's going to be 70-30, and going forward, it's even going to be higher. So the growth of large metropolitan areas is going to become key, and these are the areas that will become economic hubs. Yeah, so there we go. So we like to engage with all stakeholders, especially at our platform. You can see that we've had educationists, Sandy Uno, who is kind of one of the rising political stars in Indonesia. He's the vice president candidate for the next elections. This is the founder of Gojek on the left in the picture with the three guys, Nadiem Makarim, together with Sandy. These are the faces of the new Indonesia. Yeah, Anin is also a very, very impressive young lady that I have come to know. She is promoting youth and sports among youth in Indonesia, and very energetic and well-spoken young lady. Oh, is that it? That's it. So anyway, I'd like to close by saying that come to Indonesia. We're always open for business. It takes a while to understand the country, but once you've understood, you'll love it. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everybody. I would like to first thank the Center for International Business Education and Research, and particularly thanks to Lafon, who invited me to be here. And I'm very honored to have to be here and around the prominent person. I have Ibu Rosmalawati, Consul General for Indonesia in Chicago, and all prominent audience today. Well, let me again introduce myself. My name is Nurhaida. I'm alumni of this very prestigious university. I'm very proud of it. I was graduated from business school in 1995 here at Indiana University. And when I went back to Indonesia in 1995, I brought two certificates with me. One is my MBA certificates, and the other one is my birth certificates of my son. So my firstborn was here in Bloomington, and of course I'd like to thanks to my husband. He's here today. Shareholders, yes, shareholders. The only shareholders, yes. Well, currently I've been introduced that I'm working with the government institution right now. I'm working for Indonesia Financial Services Authority, or we call in Bahasa is OJK. And OJK was established 7 years ago, so we are kind of new. So what we are really doing is that we supervise and we regulate all financial services sectors in Indonesia. So I think we are talking about business. This really a lot about supervising all businesses in financial services in Indonesia. Among them is that we are supervising banking. We also supervising capital markets activities, and also non-bank financial institutions such as insurance companies, pension funds, and also multi-finance companies. And because of all of the duty that we have, I would like to introduce a little bit about Indonesia and FSA, because I think everybody who doing business in Indonesia, especially for financial services sectors, will have to related to OJK, or our Financial Services Authority. So the OJK is a government institutions actually, and the duty is led by Board of Commissioners. There are 9 Board of Commissioners. It's assigned a duty to supervise banking, capital market, and also non-bank financial institutions. And right now, this is my second term with the OJK, and we were elected every 5 years. So this is my second terms. My first term was I was supervising capital markets, But now the second terms, I'm now the vice chair of OJK. So that's about OJK. I would like to follow up from what Pak Shoeb just mentioned about Fintech, financial technology. So when we're talking about Fintechs, we are very much talking about a new business in Indonesia. Fintech or financial technology have been a very hot topics, not just in Indonesia, but globally. And why do we need to take very good attention to fintechs in Indonesia? Pak Shoeb just mentioned that the business in Indonesia mostly concentrated on Java Island. And if you look from this maps in front of us, actually Indonesia has more than 17,000 islands, which is stretched from east to west about 8,500 kilometers. So it is very costly for the conventional business to reach people on the remote area. So fintechs or financial technology is the answer to our problems. If we look the Indonesian today, we are on the 16th biggest economy, and we predict that we will be on the 7th in 2030. And if we look at the population, we are the fourth largest country with more than 261 million people in our country. And we will enjoy the peak of demographic bonus in 2030. And if you look at the total number of internet users, it is more than 132 million people in Indonesia. It is more than 50% of our population using internet in Indonesia. So this is actually the basic needs for fintech growth, because as Pak Shoeb just mentioned, if you have a smartphone, and then you can have a fintech in Indonesia. So if you look on that data, from the analysis from McKinsey, I took this data from McKinsey, spread use of digital finance will increase the economic on the developing countries by 3.7 trillion US dollar in 2035. In 2025, with this additional 3.7 trillions in GDP, then it will create up to about 95 million new jobs. And then with digital finance, we will create a new access to unbanked people, about 3.6 billion. And this can have another loan to individual or small businesses for 2.1 trillion US dollars. So this is very a big number, and it is very important for Indonesia. Another study from the World Bank saying that about 1% increase in financial inclusion will create a new GDP for 0.03%. And then if we have 20% in financial inclusion, increase in financial inclusion, that will create up to 1.7 million new jobs. So this is very important why we in Indonesia, especially from regulator point of view, that we need to give a conducive environment for fintech to develop in Indonesia. And if we look at the indicators of financial inclusion in Indonesia, one of the criteria is account ownership. In Indonesia right now, adults who has account ownership is about 49% in 2017. And our president have declared that we will have 75% of financial inclusion in Indonesia by 2019. And of course, we have to have a lot of things to do to reach this kind of figures. But as we look at the study that conducted by the World Bank, the increase in Indonesia account ownership is very tremendous. We can see like in 2011, we have like 22%, and then it goes up to 36%, and now 49%. But I think from in OJK survey that we did in 2016, financial inclusion in Indonesia already reached 69%. That's why we are quite positive that in 2019, we can reach the 75%. And another study from the World Bank saying that if we have, here in Indonesia, we have about 50 million micro and small medium enterprises. And if we look at the demand for financing, they will need like about 2,500 trillion rupiah, or it is equal to, I think the number, we have to take out one zero there. It's only, that's 150 billion US dollar. And then, as Pak Shoeb also mentioned, that the financing is still concentrated in Java Island. So along those data that we have, if we look at the fintech mapping in Indonesia, we see that the fintech actually doing their business in at least 6 types of businesses: payments, peer-to-peer lendings, investment management, insurance, market provisioning, and also capital raising. And of course, we have payment, the biggest chance in this 41%, and peer-to-peer lending, the next biggest one is 30%. I can say that for payment, you have to deal with central bank in Indonesia because the license is from the central banks. But the rest of the charts, like peer-to-peer lending, insurance, investment management, market provisioning, and also capital raising, then you will need a license from OJK. And we can see how significant the development of peer-to-peer lending in Indonesia. In terms of lenders, the number of lenders in Indonesia already reached more than 123,000 entities, which is grew by 22.48% year to date. And the growing of borrowers even more tremendous, grows by 319%. So now we have borrowers through peer-to-peer lendings in 1.09 million entities. Of course, if you look at the value is in 7.6 billion right now, US dollar. And this is not surprising because when we talk about peer-to-peer lendings, we are talking about small and medium enterprises, mostly small enterprises. That's why in terms of value, it's not quite big. But if we can increase the number of lenders and borrowers, then we are very sure that the value will be increased. And fintech is more on the startups. And with this disruption, they call it disruption in the startups, then the banking industry in Indonesia start to use more, they start to be more digital with branchless banking, or we call it in Bahasa Laku Pandai. Because if they are not trying to adjust their business, then they will be competitors from the fintech companies, then they will losing their profits. And then the branchless banking in Indonesia, we have more than 700 agents with about 19 million customers. And again, it's mostly in Java Island. And not just from banking sectors. The capital market also moving toward the digital. We have now a company, brokers in Indonesia that using online trading, meaning that they are allowed their customer to trade directly to our stock exchange. And this is have been quite some times right now, maybe for the last 5 years. And it is not surprising, in the next future, we're gonna have robo-advisors where the work of analysts will be conducted by robot with artificial intelligence. So what needs to be done? If you look at all this development in Indonesia, why us as a regulator should care about this development? So if we look at fintech development, actually there are two things. We see the opportunities, but we also see the risk. If we look at the risk, the opportunity first, they are more efficient, they are more diversity because there are a lot of innovations in this business. But we have to think about, as a regulator especially, we have to think about the risk. There could be financial risk because the incumbent will start to diminishing their profits. And then the operational risk because of the new technology. We are not very sure whether the fintech company have a good technology, so we have to test it. And also integrity risk because with the fintechs there are more and more data in on the system. So we have to make sure that the data is safe. It doesn't use wrongly or by improperly, and also micro risk because of the competition among the incumbent and the fintechs could possibly reduce the economy or the business in Indonesia. And not to mention that unpredicted risk because of the technology changing all the times and in very, very fast. We could also see the risk that the new technology is not supervised by any institutions in Indonesia. So that, I think that will bring the additional risk. If you look at the fintech development, then we see that Indonesia Financial Services Authority has done a lot of things. We have regulate peer-to-peer lendings, as I just mentioned earlier, and now we are in the process of regulating what we call equity crowdfinancing. That's kind of fundraising through the capital market. And we have seen a lot of attention, a lot of proposal for crowdfunding in Indonesia. So what is the major challenges that we must address? First, the financial inclusion involves two aspects. We are talking about commercial side and also the social side. And we also have to see the public understanding about technology is not really there yet. So we have to make sure that people understand the technology. We also have infrastructure, meaning that we need to make people can afford smartphones so they can be reached out by these providers. And also we have to pay attention to cybersecurity and etc. A lot of things that we have to do in Indonesia. And as I mentioned earlier, the government of Indonesia, especially OJK, very supportive. We try to have a regulation that are workable for the development of fintechs, because this was very kind of tricky. Because if we regulate these sectors heavily, they will not grow. But if we regulate them loosely, we are considering or we are jeopardizing the consumer protection. So we have to be balanced, to strike the balance between to regulate them so they can be safe to the consumers, but we also have to make sure that they can grow, because we have some good condition for them to grow. So that's about regulation in Indonesia. So when we talk about this, basically, what is the difference between regulating the incumbent, meaning that banking, capital market, and non-bank financial institutions, with the fintechs? If we can compare, the incumbent, we regulate them based on prudential-oriented disclosure, but for fintech, we will have to have another approach, which is customer-oriented. So the important thing is that they have to be transparent, they have to be to have a good information technology and communication technology, and most of them, as I mentioned, most of them are startup company. So this is a young entrepreneurs that have some innovation, some ideas to start their business. So what we have in our regulation right now, we ask them to register with us to make sure that we know how big they are in the market and what kind of business they are in. So when we ask them to register with us, the requirement is very simple. They just have to mention their company, what kind of what type of product that they have, and what is their business plan. Then after the startups register with us, then we try to test them in what we call it sandboxing. In the sandboxing, we try to see whether they already fulfill the requirements. And then after they go in our sandbox, then we will have 3 criteria. Whether they can get a recommendation for us to continue their business, or they have to revise some of the requirements, or they are not allowed to continue their business. Then after that, then they can, if they are recommended, then they start to register with us. They start to get a license from us. So at the start, I just would like to stop there. So if you have more questions, I will be happy to answer your question. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Okay. My name is Eka. I'm from Indonesia. Yes, I'm from the Kalimantan Island, not the Java one. And this has been an issue that we need to make sure that both of you are talking about, Bu Ida and Pak Shoeb, about Pak Shoeb talked about the business hubs, the need of getting new hubs outside of Java and Jakarta, and Bu Ida talked about the laku pandai that has been tested that mostly are coming from Java Island. Is the question that the others outside Java has less potential than Java? I know Java consists of 51% of the business and the population is there. Will there be more opportunities outside Java, or if other company wants to invest in Indonesia, should they come to Java and Jakarta, or just outside the Java and Jakarta? Thank you.
Okay, Pak Eka, thank you for your questions. Actually, the fact now is that most of businesses is in Java, but the governments try to push the business also to develop business in Java. Why do we have concentrated business in Java? Because all the infrastructures that is needed for business are in Java, and we don't have enough infrastructure such as toll roads or and harbors and everything outside Java. But now the government of Indonesia, with the new infrastructure development programs, we start to what we call it developing Indonesia from the outside. So we now we see a lot of infrastructure developments outside Java, in Kalimantan, even in Papua, in Sumatra. So hopefully with this kind of development in Indonesia, we hope that people will be interested to start their business outside Java. And I think if you go to Java, is already very crowded right now. So you need to, if you go to outside Java, a lot of privilege that government gives to your business. So I think it's very welcome everyone if you like to start your business, not in Java, but like we have a lot of potential in Sumatra, a lot of potential in Kalimantan, and also in Bali, Lombok, everywhere. If you are in tourism business, there are a lot of beautiful tourism area outside Java. That's okay. Yeah.
I think I'll just add one point is that I think connectivity, digital connectivity is going to change the game. So in the past, because Java was the most populated island, it is the most densely populated island on earth, everybody went to Java. But today, you don't have to. You can still connect with Java, but you don't have to be in Java. And I think that's what's happening in a lot of businesses. We were in Palembang. We organized a forum in Palembang just 2 months ago. And it is one of the fastest growing cities in Indonesia. It's not in Java, it's in South Sumatra. So I think Kalimantan, I think Balikpapan is also one of the so-called emerging hubs.